Voilà.
Oui, oui, non, je connais, je veux dire, le traité, je sais qu'il y a un traité d'électrolytique.
Mais il n'est pas bon.
Pas bon.
Si, mais il n'est pas à un niveau très.
Ah oui. Ah oui, mais alors en France, il y a Jouguet qui est Jouguet, c'est pas mal.
Oui.
Il y a Poinceau aussi.
Mais venez donc prendre un rapport.
Mais enfin, c'est pas.
Oui.
C'est pas une promenade de santé.
Bon, alors.
Bon.
Oui, mais
Bon, ben, quelque chose vous prend.
C'est quand même un on peut obtenir un résultat mathématique avec
que l'effet Aharonov-Bohm dépend de la distance entre le fil magnétique et les trous Young, enfin les trous Young ou les sources, quoi. Ce que personne n'a jamais dit. Alors, est-ce qu'il est possible de le vérifier expérimentalement? J'en suis pas du tout sûr, parce que tu sais, c'est pas la peine que je vais expliquer que quand tu as deux faisceaux qui sont comme ça, si tu commences à manœuvrer un truc entre eux, tu vas en arrêter. Tu sais plus ce que tu fais, tu vas en arrêter. Hein. Effectivement, tu me diras que si tu l'arrêtes, tu n'auras pas d'interférence.
Oui, mais bon,
on verra bien que ça ne va pas.
oui, oui.
Tiens, je te fais l'accueil.
Bonjour. Ah, bonjour. Ça va? Bonjour.
Vous voulez vous défaire de ça?
Oui, je vais mettre ma
Est-ce que
chaise.
c'est un endroit à peu près chauffé?
Oui, non, ça
Oh, ou jeter ça sur les revues là.
Sur Robert, vous avez eu ça, non?
Il y a pardon.
Sur Robert, juste.
Donc moi-même, c'est des calculs sur les forces de demandées. Enfin, je dirais que ça n'a pas la portée, mais c'est des calculs
Merci.
amusants sur ce qu'on essaye de faire maintenant.
Merci.
Ça mélange atomes, électromagnétiques.
Ça, je transmettrai les réactions que ça va provoquer.
Voilà. Par contre, ça ne traite pas les parties magnétiques, et ça c'est un vraiment, c'est-à-dire que toutes les forces dites à courte distance ne sont jamais traitées d'un point de vue des magnétiques. Et si on envoie un atome magnétique à côté d'une surface, il peut y avoir des images magnétiques, tout ça n'est pas traité. Et ça, il y a
Autre chose,
sinon, il y a un autre problème dont je vous parlerai une autre fois aussi, qui est celui de traiter correctement l'émission spontanée d'un atome en mouvement.
non, moi je vais pas faire. Enfin, si, je vais travailler.
Et on s'est rendu compte qu'un collègue, en travaillant sur la méthonium, on l'a mis sous forme passive, qu'en fait, il y a ce que raconte le scientifique, c'est qu'il y a des familles, c'est-à-dire que le recul sépare l'émission et l'absorption, c'est-à-dire ou bien on parle d'excité zéro photon, et puis une impulsion P pour l'atome, et puis on finit avec fondamental, un photon par cas, et puis une impulsion pour l'atome P non par cas, donc tous ces processus sont séparés. Alors c'est vrai, même à l'approximation nucléaire, c'est vrai que la force de mais par contre, il y a un effet Zeeman qui lui recule, évidemment, puisque le champ magnétique recule.
Très bien.
Mais par contre, l'effet Zeeman, lui, ne change pas d'état. Et comme il ne change pas d'état, il couple un état d'une impulsion avec un autre état d'une impulsion différente. Ce n'est pas une création de paquets d'ondes, en quelque sorte.
Je suis toujours très attentif à ce genre de hasard, parce que ma documentation scientifique est très largement basée sur le baraka.
Évidemment supérieure, de considérer qu'il y a bien l'émission qui part d'un atome
je suis très peu
où il y a le recul, mais les termes Zeeman qui sont recul bien, c'est électromagnétique. Parce que c'est le problème qui est traité.
Jacques,
oui. Ah, donc qui donc est un spécialiste des électromagnétismes d'avant, disons Maxwell, avant les champs, donc de l'action à distance de Weber, et aussi qui a travaillé beaucoup sur le principe de Mach. conséquences en dynamique. Donc il va nous présenter ses travaux qui sont très importants en ce sens que très peu de gens travaillent dessus et qu'il est très bon et il est très méritoire que quelques-uns continuent à s'en occuper pour garder le flambeau de cette science qu'il ne faut pas perdre, je pense. Voilà, c'est à vous. Merci.
Je suis très heureuse d'être ici avec vous et avec l'invitation de M. Robert, M. Lechac, M. Costa de Beauregard à la Fondation Louis de Broglie. Je vais parler aujourd'hui sur un sujet que je travaille presque à 15 ans, sur l'électrodynamique de Weber. Mais je dois m'excuser parce que je vais parler en anglais parce que les idées de physique viennent plus vite dans ma tête en anglais. Mais on peut d'après discuter en français, pas de problème. The subject which we will discuss today, I have been working for many years with the electrodynamics developed by Weber and the application of a similar law to gravitation. We will try to present the origins of Weber's law, the connections with Ampere's work, and later on some modern developments and experiments which are being developed in the last few years. And at the end we can discuss all of these subjects. Those of you who have never seen Weber, he was born before Maxwell and died after Maxwell. He was contemporary of Maxwell, and he worked mainly at Göttingen together with Gauss. Maxwell knew a lot about Weber's work, and he did quote Weber many times in his treatise. He went to Göttingen in 1831 when he was 27 years old. Gauss was 54, twice older than Weber. And in 1846 he developed the force law, which we will present here, and was the first to measure the ratio of electrostatic and electromagnetic units of charge, and also developed the idea of conservation of energy related with his force law. At the time of Weber, 1846, when he presented his force law, his main idea were the following. He knew about Coulomb's force law between point charges, which is analogous to Newton's law for gravitation. He also knew about Ampere's force law between current elements, between 1820 and 1826, which is a similar force law from that of Coulomb. Instead of charge, we have current and a length. But it also falls as 1 over distance square. It is also a central force law, but it is more complex because it depends also on the angles between the current elements. But it's very similar to Coulomb. And Weber knew also about Faraday's law of induction, that when we change the current in the primary circuit, we induce a current in the secondary circuit. So these were separate phenomena. No one knew what was an electric current, and some of them supposed that it was due to a fluid which had no connections with electricity. So at this time, the idea of Weber and Fechner was to try to unify all of these laws, but following a completely different approach than that which Maxwell followed later on. The idea was the following. Weber wanted to derive Ampere's law from Coulomb, but there are no currents here. So what is a current? So the supposition by Weber was that current is charge in motion. Very simple, but at that time, so the idea is, if current is charge in motion, so we essentially will change IdL by QV, current by charge times a velocity. So essentially we will have in Ampere's law Q1, Q2, V1, V2. But these V1, V2 are not here. So he will include an extra term which depends on velocities. If current is charge in motion, Faraday's law, when you change a current here, you induce a current here. If current is charge in motion, when you change a current, you are accelerating charge. So microscopically, you can say that Faraday's law of induction means that when you accelerate a charge here, you induce a force in the other circuit which depends on acceleration. So the idea of Weber was this. I will increase Coulomb's law, which are a term which depends on the velocities, and in this way I will be able to derive Ampere's law between current elements. And it will include a term which depends on accelerations, because then I will be able to derive Faraday's law of induction. That's very simple, but at that time Weber was a pioneer. It was the first time in physics that force was introduced depend on relative velocities and acceleration.
Excuse me, you should insist upon that. It is relative velocities and acceleration.
Yes, at the moment I'm only giving the ideas, but the final presentation of the law is this. So this is the final presentation. We have two charges, Q1, Q2, separated by a distance r. So this is Coulomb's law. So the two terms which Weber did include r dot, which is relative velocity between the interacting charges, and r2 dots, which is relative acceleration between the two charges. And it was included a constant, which at that time no one knew the value of this constant in 1846. It is the ratio of electromagnetic and electrostatic units of charge. To derive Coulomb's law is here, electrostatic charge. You need to derive Ampere's law, which depends on magnetism. So we will have a constant which will relate these two units. The first time that this constant was measured was 10 years later, also by Weber. And it was found that it had the same value as the velocity of light in vacuum, suggesting strongly a connection between optics and electromagnetism. So this is the essence of Weber's electrodynamics. Everything is contained in this expression here. And it is also a central force law along the line connecting the two charges. What are the advantages of Weber's force?
Sorry, R is a vector or just a
R is a scalar.
A scalar.
Yes, the unit vector would come here, but this is scalar quantities.
Okay.
But F is a vector. Look here, in your formula F.
Yes.
F is a vector, isn't it?
Yes, but I just present here to simplify, but you can put a vector here and the unit vector connecting the two charges.
Relative acceleration is a vector also.
No. Here, this is scalar quantity. Second derivative of the distance. And r dot is also a scalar quantity. First derivative of the distance. The unit vector will come here.
Yeah, okay.
What are the advantages of Weber's force? First, when there are no relative motion between the charges, we recover Coulomb's force and also Faraday's law, Gauss' law. So the whole of electrostatics is built in Weber's law. It follows the strong action and reaction, the forces along the straight line connecting the two charges. This means conservation of linear and angular momentum. Linear because action and reaction, and angular momentum because it's a central force law. It's very important. When Weber presented this force law, it was criticized by Helmholtz because Helmholtz believed that it could not comply with conservation of energy because it depends on velocity and so on. But Weber could show that his force law could be derived from a velocity-dependent potential energy. This was presented by Weber 1848, 2 years later. And it was the first time in physics that a potential energy was presented which depend also on velocity. And then Weber was able to show later on that his force law complies with conservation of energy. This potential energy plus the kinetic energy between the interacting charges will be a constant in time. The laws of Ampere and Faraday can be derived from it. It was built with this purpose. Okay? And the most important aspect to me, which made me work with Weber's law in the first place, was because it depends only on the distance between the interacting charges, relative radial velocity and relative radial acceleration. This is what I call relational force law. It is different, for instance, from the Lorentz force law, QE plus QV cross B. The velocity in Lorentz force law is velocity of the charge relative to the observer, not velocity between interacting charges, interacting bodies. Weber's force and potential energy are the only ones up to now present in physics which are completely relational. The observer doesn't play a role here.
Excuse me, it is even more general than Galileo because inertia comes in.
Even more general than Galileo.
Yes.
Exact. Because later on it's possible to derive Newton's second law of motion based on relative acceleration of the test body and the distant universe. Correct. So these are the main aspects of Weber's law. I will not go here in too many details. We have a book devoted only to Weber's electrodynamics and all these details. I will try to present here more a comparison between Weber's force and Lorentz force and to see in which conditions is it possible to distinguish one from the other, experimentally or theoretically. Kirchhoff in 1857 was able to study the propagation of electromagnetic signals along a wire, for instance, a telegraphy equation and so on. And when he worked in this direction, Weber in 46 had presented his force law. 10 years later, he measured the first time the constant which appeared here. It was the first time that this constant appeared in physics. Had nothing to do with light. Only the result of the experiment gave the same number. But he didn't measure any velocity. He only measured force between two charged spheres and then discharged this sphere and measured the current by the deflection of a magnet. And then he could measure this constant here. And found the same value as the velocity of light in vacuum. The next year, Kirchhoff and also Weber derived from both of them, from Weber's electrodynamics, which is an action at a distance theory, they derived the telegraphy equation for a signal propagating along a wire. Also there is action and react velocity. A depends on the resistivity of the material. When there is no resistivity, when we have a superconductor, so we have the wave equation, and the signal propagates by Kirchhoff before Maxwell, based on Weber's law. And Weber derived the same result, but he also made experiments, and his result was delayed in publication. But both of them work with Weber's formulation. Everything here is before Maxwell's works in electrodynamics. The works of Maxwell came essentially between 61 and 64. There is also another paper of 55, but the main ones are these two. And then Maxwell essentially introduced in Ampere circuital law the displacement current. When he did that, the constant which appears here, he borrowed from Weber's electrodynamics. He not only borrowed the constant from Weber's electrodynamics because he is relating magnetism with electrostatics. And that's exactly that constant which Weber introduced. But he also knew the value of this constant. And he also knew the wave equation. Then he also derived the wave equation. Nowadays, almost no one knows that the wave equation had been derived before Maxwell in a completely different approach. But Maxwell's electrodynamics is not only the fields. We also need to know how the charge react to the fields. And in modern electrodynamics, we utilize Lorentz force law, 1895, 50 years after Weber. It is essentially QE plus QV cross B. Electric force and magnetic force. The main distinction with Weber's force here is that the velocity which appears in Lorentz force is not a relative velocity between interacting bodies. If I have a charge and a magnet, the velocity which appears here, these never appear relative quantities between the interacting bodies. I decided to work with this because to me it made more sense. It was more agreed more with my intuition. Is it possible to distinguish between Weber and Lorentz? So I will try to discuss this here. One possibility would be the following. What is the force between, when we have two current carrying wires, we observe force between them. In the modern textbooks, we have only what's called Grassmann force law, IDL cross B, where B is the magnetic field due to the other current element. The B, written in this way, was presented by Biot and Savart, 1820. And the expression for the force was presented by Grassmann in 1845. This is essentially the magnetic part of Lorentz force law, QVB. Instead of QV, we have IDL. But it came 50 years before Lorentz. Lorentz knew that. When we open this double cross product, then we get the following result. The force is I1A2 by R square. Depends on the angle between the current elements, has a radial component, but has also another component which is not radial. Okay? This is the only expression which appears in the textbooks nowadays. But Ampere himself presented a different expression. The expression international system of it is also A1, A2 by R square, but both components are radial. So the force, no matter how the two current elements orient themselves, the force will always be central. this first component is similar, but the numerical coefficient is different. And the second component is completely different. Okay? So they are different expressions. In the textbooks we find only this, because with Lorentz force law we can only derive Grassmann. We cannot derive Ampere. With Weber, on the other hand, we can only derive Ampere. We cannot derive Grassmann. It was always the opposite, because first came Ampere, then Weber. First came Grassmann, then Lorentz. But if we begin with charges, with Lorentz and Weber, then with Lorentz we derive this, not this. With Weber we derive this and not this. So the force of Ampere is not compatible with Lorentz.
Excuse me.
And for this reason also,
Yes, but of course.
this is a very long controversy which comes and Grassmann. But until recent years it had not been solved to the best of, maybe not yet until today. Maybe not yet until today. Let me show the distinctions. Suppose, for instance, that we have two current elements which are like that, okay, orthogonal to one another. If we calculate the force of 2 on 1 and 1 on 2 with Ampere, it's 0 in this particular case. With Grassmann, on the other hand, this does not make force on this one, but this creates a force on this one. So Grassmann does not satisfy, does not comply with action and reaction. Ampere always complies. Grassmann not, for current elements. So they are different. Another situation in which they are different. Suppose that we have two current elements which are aligned with one another, parallel and with the currents in the same direction. According to Ampere, they should repel one another. According to Grassmann, they should exert no force on one another. This is the origin of what's called Ampere's tension, and so on. So there are many differences. But if they are so different, and if Ampere was so famous, Maxwell, for instance, knew both expressions and said that the expression of Ampere was undoubtedly the best, because it was the only one which complied with action and reaction and was along the straight line connecting the charges. Maxwell also knew about Grassmann. It was 10 years before Maxwell, and he compared both. And according to Maxwell, the Ampere's force was better. But if it is better, why cannot we distinguish both of them? Because there is a very funny result, that when we integrate the force of an arbitrary circuit and calculate the force of a current element of another circuit, both of them agree. What they distinguish them when it is what is called in mathematics an exact differential. When we integrate in a closed circuit of arbitrary form, it goes to 0. So, no matter if we have two or more closed circuits, we cannot distinguish them. This is the point. And so we see that even with Ampere's law, we can define a magnetic field, if we wish, for closed circuits. Ampere did not work with magnetic fields. He worked with action at a distance between current elements. But in modern, if we wish, we could call this a magnetic field and so on. But the point which has been, so I will present here some results with which I have been involved. Many years, I worked for 1 year in Boston.